I think even Bart Ehrman, who's an atheist historian, like admits that. So let's see. Did Paul persecute the church? I think he agrees. So, here's Bart Ehrman's blog, post from June 14, 2016. How Paul persecuted the Christians. He doesn't let you read his blog post. Alright, so, I mean, again, this is a criterion of embarrassment for Paul to, make this up. It's a whole other issue. But, more importantly, he tells the Galatians, y'all could check me up on this. So then it's that's a continual thing. Okay? And in Paul's case, he seems to he wasn't jealous of Christians. It seems that he really disagreed with what Christians taught. Okay? So anyway, let's move on to some other counterexamples. Here's another one. The zombies of Haiti. There's so many stories. It's still on the law books down in Haiti. So, people using voodoo magic to raise people from the dead. And it's a way that you become a slave forever, because even death can't end your slavery. They raise you from the dead, and you have to do drudgery slave work as a zombie to a wizard. Okay, so, the problem here is that there's a natural explanation that has supporting evidence. So, there is a poison from the pufferfish that can cause people to seem completely dead, and they'll wake up later. And these wizards have said that they do this. And so, that's a perfectly plausible, natural explanation with supporting evidence for it. So, let's keep going. The Moonies is this weird thing. I thought I'd bring them up. They seem like a crazy cult, this Korean engineer in the 1950s claimed that Jesus came and told him that, I didn't save people physically, I only saved them spiritually. I'm giving you special anointing, and you're going to be the second coming of me on the earth, and you have to, have sex with women, and then they'll be saved physically, and they can have sex with their husbands. And, okay, well, that seems clear why he, quote unquote, got that vision. But again, the people in this group, this isn't a delusion on the level of the apostles. Nobody's putting their lives on the line for this. And so, whenever someone brings up some kooky cult, it's well, did they die for this? That's a difference. And now let's look at a cult where people did die, and this will be our last thing. The Heaven's Gate cult that died in... Everyone committed suicide to evolve beyond the human level and go up to the spaceship, which they believed the Hale-Bopp comet that was going around the Earth at the time. In 1997, they committed suicide and went up to the spaceship. Okay, so how did it get started? It got started with this man and this woman who, it sounded very similar to Gnosticism. They believed that they were more evolved, superior to regular humans. And, they could read the Bible correctly, interpret it correctly, and, get messages in there that weren't, were secretly hidden in there. So they would have, crazy interpretations of the Bible, okay? This group eventually cut themselves off from outsiders in 1975. They did this big thing. They all met up at this hotel, and then they just vanished, and they became this, traveling monastery is how they're described. Okay? They traveled throughout the country for decades. So they cut themselves off from outsiders in 1975, but they didn't commit suicide until 1997. So they were traveling the country for all these years, completely cut off from their families and from everyone. In fact, when they committed suicide, they had $5.75 in their pocket, everyone. Was wearing the same clothes, the same Nike Decades was the name of the shoes. Because the leader, this guy named Applewhite, and the other woman, her last name's Nettles, Applewhite had so much control that he would dictate what kind of shoes people wore. Okay? And it already starts out, you have a comment here that could have been an illusion. They could have thought there was a spaceship. So, that's not the same as with the apostles. There's no external reference object or referent for them to hallucinate Jesus. But the real issue with this whole thing that separates them from the disciples is, in the case of Heaven's Gate cult, we actually have good evidence for group delusion, hallucination, mental illness, all the above. Because the news media did stories on them as far back as the 1970s, all the way through. There were documentaries and news stories on them that would follow them around because they were so weird. And everyone was surprised by the 1997 suicide. I mean, another problem for them was that, like, they believed that their teaching was that when they committed suicide, they would receive superior bodies. And so this woman, the co-leader alongside Applewhite, her name's Nettles, it's her last name. She died in 1985, and that contradicted their teachings because she was supposed to, like, receive this super body when she died, or not die or something like that. So it was a real problem for them. But, like, the issue is, when it comes to the apostles, we have no supporting evidence that they were deluded or hallucinated or had, these severe mental illnesses that could lead to either of those things. So, like, in that event, then we just have to say, what are the odds that you would pick someone out of the population at random and that person would have a visual, auditory hallucination like Paul would have had, like Peter would have had? 0.008 or 0.8%. Okay, and then the issue is you multiply improbabilities together. You've got to, so like you say you've got to have Peter hallucinate, Paul hallucinate. Then Peter's got to convince the rest of the apostles to be deluded. Okay, then you've got to explain that empty tomb. And then you've got Jesus' brother James that we talked about in the hallucination video. There's good evidence for him. And so then it's like you multiply all those together and you get like 1 in a million chance that all happened. Because the issue is, like, if you pick someone out of society at random, or if you just go with hallucination theory, okay, like for the apostles, and you say they all hallucinated. Okay, so 0.008 times 0.008 times 0.008, how many apostles are we talking about? Probably 12, given that Polycarp says it's 12. The oral tradition that comes to us from going back to the earliest apostles in 1 Corinthians 15 says it's 12. So, like, or Polycarp just says the apostles, but, like, it's probably this 12. Ignatius gives them more details about this, how it was auditory and visual. He says Peter and those with him. And so, like, it's like 1 in 30 billion, if you go up to just 6.0008 times each other. And that's how you calculate the probability. Think about it this way. What are the odds that you would pick someone out of the population at random and that person would have a visual and auditory hallucination at some point in his or her life? 0.8% or 0.008. Okay, so what are the odds that you would pick another person randomly and that person would also have one? Well, that's 0.008 times 0.008. Okay, so because, like, there's so many different possible people that you could have picked, and, like, you had a 8 in 100 chance and an 8 in 100 chance. You get 8 times 8, whatever that is, 64 out of 10,000 chance. You get the idea. So, like, the issue is, if you have supporting evidence, then that can outweigh initial prior improbability. So, like, for example, this is the William Lane Craig example. Let's say that Bill is a college student and 90% of college students drink beer. What are the odds that Bill drinks beer? 90%. But let's say that we add additional evidence that Bill goes to Wheaton College and, he's a president of the BCM, and Wheaton College has a strict no alcohol policy. well, that's going to have to significantly alter your odds that Bill drinks. Because and it can even change it to where it's, only a 10% chance of him instead of 90. 10% chance of him drinking. So, like, drinking beer. So, if there's evidence, like, say, for example, that we have good evidence that the apostles experimented with hallucinogenic drugs all the time, then we're not picking people out of the population at random and asking whether or not they hallucinated. We're asking whether or not people who we already know experiment with hallucinatory drugs have a hallucination. And that would be very different probabilities. Although a lot of times that's still not the case. People who experiment with these drugs oftentimes have to like close their eyes to have the hallucination. And oftentimes they know it's a hallucination. It's more rare, even in those cases, for those people to like have ones that they really think are real. But I mean, the issue is we have news stories on the Heaven's Gate cult that go all as far back as the 1970s, over and over again. So we have good evidence for probably that they were deluded. They never claimed to see anything. They claimed to be able to interpret the Bible correctly through inner knowledge. And that's Gnosticism, FYI. So, like, Gnosticism is this thing where, like, oh my goodness, alright, so in the Gnostic view of things, there's this ultimate supreme God, and this ultimate supreme God gives birth or emanates other gods and other gods. And then, like, there's one of these gods named Sophia, and she's really young, and she loves the Supreme God so much that she wants to just be absorbed into the Supreme God. And she's upset because it can't happen, because like the Supreme God must always be beyond us. So then in her upset state, in her sad mood, she accidentally gives birth to physical matter, which is born out of someone's sadness, and physical matter bad. And then that physical matter is pushed away to its own place by itself because it's a bad thing. And then another God named Jesus is created to help God see the truth. Okay, so then whenever they are confused in the lies, so this physical matter eventually becomes a God, but it's a physical matter God, so it's evil, and it's literally a monster. And he comes to believe that like he's the only God that exists, and then he creates these other sub-gods, which are the angels, and he's the God of the Old Testament. The God of the Old Testament is an evil God, and you should never pray to him. And then he creates humans, and humans are just animals, and we know it's no big deal to kill us. We're not smarter or anything. We're just animals. Then Sophia comes, and to undo the damage that the demiurge, or like the God of the Old Testament, they call him the demiurge. To undo what he did, she creates like spiritual true gods and puts them inside the bodies of some of these humans. Not all, and it's like in the Gospel of Mary, it's like no women. And then, like, Mary's so awesome that they're like, man, Jesus, you got to use your Jesus powers to turn Mary into a man because she's really a God. Okay, so, like, only certain people are really gods inside. And then, like, you have all the knowledge to interpret the New Testament to learn about this far beyond secret world of the mighty gods where you really come from, and all the levels and stuff. And they go into super detail about the ultimate world beyond the physical world, with the ultimate source and all this, like they you have to pay them like money, and then they teach it to you, but that just like they give you some of the secret knowledge, but then that just awakens it inside you, and then you can interpret the New Testament correctly. And you can so they will read the parables, and like this thing here really represents this level of the emanations from, like they like get anything that, like every different name that's used for Jesus is actually a different God, and like And so then Jesus comes, to give us this secret knowledge, and all that stuff about dying for our sins and all that. That was all like a cover story, like. But it's all secretly hidden in there. But you have to have the secret knowledge inside you, and like that seems to be what's going on with the Heaven's Gate cult. They seem to be like Nettles and Applewhite. Think that they can like, read the Bible and get that from it, and so they didn't claim to see anything. So there's no hallucination, but they were willing to die for their delusion. But there's good evidence for a group delusion in this case. If group delusion is even a thing, it's debated. But like, there's good evidence that they were insane. Because we've documented them throughout the years and understood how they operated and how they lived. And, you can look at like the videotapes that they left behind about why they were willing to do this. And you can tell they're a little bit off their rocker. I mean, there's a lot of issues where like, Applewhite borrowed one of the members' charge cards and then made a bunch of charges on it, and then it was like, those are fraudulent charges, and then it was like, oh, sorry, they're not. Applewhite controlled like every little thing that they did within the group, he, like what shoes they wore, and like they insanity and these kind of things followed certain pathways, and you can recognize the signs of it. So anyway, and there's one point where he actually did steal a rental car. Because I think he thought it was okay for him. And then a big one for them is the fact that they really believed that Nettles, when she died, or like couldn't die, or when she died she would get the super body. It wasn't supposed to be possible for her to die of cancer, and she did die of cancer. And so then they were like, what do we do with this? And so there's good evidence in this case, like that we lack in the case of the apostles. And like I said in the video about hallucinations and delusions and all that, that like you could hold out for evidence in the case of the apostles, but like realistically, you should make a decision based on what we have, not based on what we might have. Because alternatively, we might find good evidence that they didn't hallucinate or weren't deluded. So, and in fact, we have some. Their writings seem, the only thing that they would have been deluded about is Jesus coming back from the dead, which is the subject in question, which we can't say they were deluded based on that. But is there any other evidence? Well, do the letters make sense? Are they rational overall? Are Paul's arguments from the Old Testament well thought out and well put together? How often do they face death? Do they seem rational in the face of death? Do they seem upset but yet still trudging on? Like, a lot of things add up with them that don't add up with the Heaven's Gate cult. So anyway, that is going to be the end of this video. Assuming that that's even possible. Yep. Alright, so an hour 20. Our final wrap up for historical evidence. I think it's going to be just fine. If you've been along for this ride, thank you so much. Have a lovely, lovely day.